Kathryn, thanks so much for joining me on an N of One. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Very glad to be here. Happy I could join.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. An N of
Yeah,
One is all about the individual stories of people. As social psychologists and sort of behavioral scientists, we're often taught to think about sort of the collective norm and the group and the things that will work for everyone. But there's a lot of joy in celebrating individual stories and the diversity that people bring to a field. And so I'm so glad that we're going to get to tell a little bit of your story today.
I agree. It's the individual stories are always what makes it interesting. That's why we do qualitative research, right?
100%. We want that cross validation. And so I want to go all the way back. We always start, with I want to talk about young Kathryn, right? I know Kathryn, the adults, we know each other. Like I know that part. I want like 7-year-old Kathryn, right? If you were introducing me to 7-year-old Kathryn, like what were you like as a kiddo?
Um, she probably wouldn't talk to you much. She'd probably kind of like shy away from that. But yeah, I was kind of an introverted kid. More of, I would say, like a quiet observer. I'm the youngest child by far, so that sort of lended itself to hanging back a little bit, watching what other people say to each other, how like conversations go and different dynamics. If I think of myself at that age, I kind of see myself sort of sitting in the corner a little bit or sitting at the end of the table and kind of watching people's facial expressions, or it always interested me to look at the person who wasn't talking when other people were talking, see what they were doing, or kind of watch someone when they were finished interacting and the sigh that they gave, or again, the facial expression or something like that. So I think I just was always sort of watching people, listening, taking it all in, which definitely became part of, I think I have an advantage of, I actually wrote down, my mom got me this book when I was 7 and got to write in it. You write things like, here's how tall I am, here's what I do, but it also wrote, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I wrote that when I was 7 in there. So I actually have it. And so I know that I wrote that I wanted to be a writer, also a singer and a mother. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I'm still, I'm hanging up the dreams of the singing career. I think it might be over.
Hey,
So
karaoke is always an option.
that's true. That's true. Career in the loosest term. Um, but that's, yes, that's the most of what I remember is sort of always from a young age thinking about, I was sort of fascinated by people
Mhm.
and behavior always, and why people did what they did. I spent a lot of time, not only was I the youngest, also lived sort of out in the country, spent a lot of time outside, like sort of by myself, pre-screens and all of those things. So had a lot of time on my hands to sort of like sit and analyze and process and think about why people did what they did, why I do what I do, what might come next, kind of all the dynamics of people interaction. So that's what I think I remember the most from when I was that age. And then through, sort of that elementary school period, if I think back on what I was interested in or what, I was sort of called out as being good at, it was always around kind of the writing, storytelling, and also puzzles. Like a lot of, I really enjoyed not like puzzles, physical puzzles, but more like logic puzzles, and
Mhm.
even would write sometimes for myself puzzles and do them, which is always kind of a little bit like the student having the answer key. Like I wrote myself puzzles and solved them,
Look,
but kind
people
of
play chess against themselves. It's a thing. And
right.
and we grew up, in an era of story-rich puzzles, Encyclopedia Brown and all sorts of like
Exactly.
great investigative mystery style things. When you think about yourself as a young person and when you talk about being a writer, did you have in your mind more like fiction writing, or did you have in your mind, more like biographies and observing the world and sort of what we might think of as nonfiction or science writing?
I mean, probably both eventually, but when I was that young, a lot of more of the creative writing. So I did writing a lot of, journaling, yes, about my own perspectives, but I loved making up characters. So creative writing, writing plays and things like that, which I would kind of wrangle my friends in on doing in school and make them do, or like radio shows kind of thing. Again, back in the day before we really had video, like kind of doing that on our boom boxes and put in a tape and like make up a radio show, that kind of stuff. So I just always loved the idea of kind of taking a compilation of my life or things that I have observed and then creating characters out of it. Also loved reading. You know, that was definitely a part of it. Would read the same books over and over again. But the idea of being able to create worlds and people and stories was always very appealing as well.
All right, DJ Kathryn. I hear this alternate, singer career,
It might be, yeah. There's always a next chapter,
there's
possibly.
always a next chapter. And did this, so, as you get into like the middle school and early high school years, did that sort of persist? Were you still in this sort of like, hey, writing, creative, quiet vein? Like, or did that shift for you?
Definitely still that was a big part of it. I was a writer for our school newspaper in high school and things like that. Always gravitated towards my English classes were always my favorite. My English teachers were always my favorite. And those types of things, for sure. I guess that's where like the newspaper thing is where I started to kind of branch out from purely the creative and more of the reporting sort of side of writing, but also started to not be as quiet. So I was also like in a lot of other clubs, was on like dance team, pom pom, things like that. So I think started to also branch out just in terms of like being able to have kind of different social outlets and those types of things. So
What do you think made the difference there from the sort of quiet kid that maybe emerged a little bit into a more social kid?
um that's interesting. I part of it probably just growing up, part of it I had the advantage of being staying in the same place the entire time I was growing up. I didn't have to move schools or anything like that. So I think it's also just I had a lot of friends and really great groups of friends, and that was able to kind of be, great. I have a great family, a great support system. So I think just growing into a little bit more of that confidence, which definitely helps. I really think youth sports and all of those things, one of the great things about it is just that confidence piece. Like you're sitting there doing something and all these people are watching you and kind of getting that experience for later in professional life or whatever the case may be that you end up doing.
And I know you gravitated to some of these more writing classes. Where was science and math, which is now, part of what you do? Where was that in? Were you like allergic to that? Was it just meh?
I never felt as confident in math. I definitely was very like I was sort of above average on the testing scale and all of those things for reading, writing. Loved words, loved vocab, was in the spelling bees and all of those kinds of things. Math, I was definitely more unsure. The types of math that I always gravitated towards were like theorems and kind of things like that were less numbery and more like, I guess, the logic puzzle kind of, or more spatial, like geometry sorts of math. Science, it's interesting, was never really my thing. But when I think of high school science, I think of like having to dissect pigs and frogs and, chemistry and things like that. I think it was the type of science, but I did have a psychology class in high school that I unsurprisingly loved. I think everyone loves their first psychology classes, and I very much did as well.
That's awesome that you were exposed at sort of that early age. You get this psych experience, you're really gravitating towards the writing piece. You now have to, if I'd asked you then what you wanted to be, we know it's seven, right? We have the writer, singer, mother version of Kathryn. You know, you have some realistic expectations in high school. Things start to materialize into some more concrete pieces. What did sort of your career path were you imagining in high school, or did you know?
Through high school, I started to think, just to your point, to the writing, like what could I do within that? And at that time and in that sort of chapter of what was available to me, this is dating myself, but it's pre even internet and those types of things when I was in high school. So the world that I had available of what I could see that people went into, I sort of naturally thought, well, that means it's journalism.
Mm.
And I thought that I should be something a little bit more practical than like English literature, perhaps, or what I deemed to be more practical. So I thought that would be journalism. I started college with sort of that same thought that maybe it would be like a journalism angle.
Got it. And so you're like, all right, this is paid writing, right? Fiction writing is, maybe I'll do that at night and maybe I'll hit it big, but like my day job will be paid writing. At what point in college did you go, hey, maybe this isn't because you do, there is you pivot over to sort of more of a marketing business focus. So at some point there is a more capitalist turn that happens here. Talk to me about the college
Yeah.
experience and what sort of led you in that direction.
I would say mostly that was honestly like an external influence. My parents, again, at the time, journalism didn't seem as, again, we were all pre-internet and all of those things. LinkedIn didn't exist or any of that. So it was based on the world that and definitely was more of I have an older brother and sister who were business, kind of a business bend as well. My dad was an attorney for 50 years. So the nudge to be into something a little more practical than journalism seemed. And so honestly, business was like, okay, my siblings did it, I'll do it too. But finance and accounting and those kinds of things really didn't appeal as much to me and didn't come as naturally. And I just didn't find as interesting. My older sister did marketing. So kind of I chose marketing as the thing that seemed the most like I could be good at and the most interesting.
And there's, you enjoyed psychology in high school. Did you take psychology in college? Like, is there an alternative universe where Kathryn's a clinical psychologist and you went off in this other direction?
I think, yes, I think about that a lot, especially given the team that I'm on now. That was much more, basically, almost everyone on my current team went the PhD route, a lot of them cognitive psychology types of things, or PhD in marketing, which I honestly didn't even know was an option or a thing. I think if I would have seen more practical career paths for those types of things, I probably would have gone that way. Knowing what they are, being exposed to them, it just didn't feel like there was a lot of exposure to those things as paths. And if they were exposed, the the path was only lit so far, and
Yeah.
then it sort of went dark. And I think that there's fear in that, and there's unknown in that, and there's especially at that time, it's like the late 90s and that type of thing, where it's like if you can't illuminate that path, what are you going to do? What does it look like? And with business, with marketing, with a host of other things, engineering, whatever the case may be that different people were doing, you could see more of a full path. And I think now things like this and things like people being exposed and obviously being able to like have access to greater things via the internet and all of those things, there are more paths lit, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, this is uh, I have a love-hate relationship with my friends at the APA, and I gave an internal talk there once about like, the funnel of psychology graduates, right? Like they don't all become like PhD, PsyD, clinical folks, right? Like there's these whole other pathways that, to your point, are not particularly well illuminated or understood, right? And so you sort of, if you're not going to go the clinical route, right? You understand what becoming a therapist looks like, maybe depending on where you came from and whether, if you grew up in the country like I did, I don't know where the nearest therapist, I never met a therapist, right? I don't think our community had a therapist in it,
No,
anywhere, right? So even that was a weird, murky path. But even
right,
if you didn't, but certainly beyond clinical psychology or the notion that there are these other things out there was not clearly communicated, I think, to young people in that era at all.
right,
Maybe different.
exactly. And the merging of psychology and business was not a thing that was intuitive at all or created or that people were sort of making those alignments yet. So but yes, I mean I definitely think like if I had it to do all over now or if I was doing it now in what's available, I probably would have chosen a little bit differently. I think I got there, eventually, but maybe through a less direct path.
Nothing wrong with I mean, none of us got there. The direct path didn't exist. So, you did, however, even in college, you had at least some inkling of sort of a market researchy bend, right? Your study abroad was market research. Like you had sort of there was a, there's marketing like, hey, I want to go create really jazzy ads, Mad Men, whatever, whatever, whatever. That's not the path you were on. I mean, you had some inkling that there was some observatory part of this that you were interested in. Where did that come from? How did that come about?
I did. I took a marketing research class as part of the mandatory sort of marketing classes that you had to take, and really loved that. And I loved the idea of, I'd always, as I mentioned, kind of always been a reader, and the research aspect of trying to figure out kind of blending everything that I said I liked when I was little, like the puzzles and the trying to figure out. And it also appealed to me slash didn't bother me to be sort of that background part of marketing. I
Mm.
didn't necessarily need to be the front line of marketing, and the brand management and that type of thing. Again, I was very familiar with that. My sister was concurrently sort of doing the path now because she's a little bit older. So she was working at the P&Gs and the Kellogg's and all of those things. So I could see it. I knew what that path looked like, and the kind of complementary or supportive path to that of being the research end or the research arm of that. As soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, like that this is sort of a blend of, even though it's still in business and I'm still in the business school and all of those things, like I felt like that was my area.
So it called to that 7-year-old observational, maybe a little quieter. I don't need to be Don Draper. I don't want to be at the front of the table. I don't want to make this big brand presentation. I want to have done the work that empowers that. That called to your personality a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think I liked the idea of like someone's doing all that out there, like you said, but I gave them all of the information to make those decisions. Like basically I was like the intellectual engine, sort of overplaying it, but like the intellectual engine behind those decisions that went out there.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. I mean, there is a very clear through line to, from 7-year-old Kathryn to that sort of, piece of understanding and desiring to understand and being able to observe. And so I know you said, hey, I didn't have, PhD marketing wasn't even a thing that sort of popped up on my radar as a possibility. Um, and so, you graduate and you're going to go out into the working world. Do you have a concept of like, great, I'm going to graduate and then I'm going to go be a market researcher and that's a thing that I'll do for the rest of my life?
Sort of. I don't know that I looked at it that much further than really trying to figure out what my first thing was going to be. And a lot of the first things that I interviewed for, I kind of keep coming back to, didn't have a lot of the options that are available today. So it was sort of like the companies that were coming to my business school, which were numerous. Like I had the advantage also, was very fortunate to go to an awesome business school, University of Wisconsin-Madison, love it, we'll plug it all day. And at the time, they had companies coming right to our school and interviewing and all of those things. So a lot of the opportunities that I was offered, for whatever reason at that time, tended to be, there were a lot of retailer opportunities,
Mhm.
as business analysts, basically in the merchandising department was one option. So that is what I'm not even sure actually if that's on my LinkedIn now. I was there for a short time. And so I started out of college at a major retailer doing kind of that very specific job of inventory management in the merchandising department, supporting the buyers basically, and doing like sort of in the really old fashioned computer systems, the pushes of inventory out to various stores where they were needing things and things like that. But that was a semi short stint, and it didn't feel very marketing researchy to me, as much as it was in the area of forecasting and things like that. But again, partially why it was a short stint.
But it also, I mean,
That's what I
there's
did.
some develops your quant skills a little bit, right? Like, starts to get you involved with computers, right? Even if
Right.
it's short, right? There, that even all of these little things color us a little bit. But you do
Yeah.
have a longer, I mean, you go to information resources and you're there for quite a while. I mean, you have, there's a lot of behavioral scientists who every 2 years or so you see kind of a pivot. You've had sort of these much longer chunks rising in an organization. Like what brought you to IR? What was that like? Tell me a little bit about the sort of shift there.
Yes. I definitely, yes, to your point. I like to stay and sort of move around and grow, where I am. And IRI was definitely gave me that opportunity. So was a really good way, was vendor side, obviously. So really impactful in terms of seeing different kinds of companies, was primarily CPG, just the nature, I mean, was CPG. So got to see several different manufacturers, CPG manufacturers, what that looked like, got to really get into the depths of syndicated data and looking at that. And yes, the through line of solving puzzles and trying to figure out, like, if this category is down, which channel is it, what store is it, what region, down to the SKU level. And I loved that, like, sort of, you're finding the needle in the haystack of what's going wrong.
Mhm.
That really appealed to me. I love doing that and sort of got in the mix of the data. And then also we got to have access to household panel data. So which I loved even more. So the scanning sort of information of, like, I can see now what's going on in the actual household level, and people are, let's say, trying this product but never purchasing it again. That's super interesting. Or they're using this category and then they're taking a full year and they're lapsed buyers and then they're coming back again. That's super interesting. Or we're losing this sort of demographic versus that sort of demographic. So that was all really good exposure to me, really good, like, sort of the fundamentals of thinking about marketing, thinking about the basics of marketing research. I would say towards the end, and why I decided to move on, was I realized that it was a lot of, it's sort of the classic case of, now I keep reporting on the what and the what and the what, but it was really a lot of speculation on the why. And there was not a lot of, like, I just started feeling like this is really great, but I'm left with all these questions that I can't answer. And so it's like all the research that I did just begged more questions. Oh, people are never buying this again, or they're repeating this much, but not that, or this isn't selling well. All of a sudden, the velocity dropped off in Target, but I don't know why.
Yeah, and to your point, it's the tantalizingly quality version of quant, right? When you can go look at a specific household and be like, here's this household, and I can envision it in my mind, and I know it has a mom and a dad and two kids and this and that and this, and then they buy something and then they don't buy it and then they buy it again a year later. Like, that's right where qual wants you to pick up, but you're sort of restricted in your tool set sometimes at these things, and it just, can be really, really maddening when you only have one of those two levers that you can pull. Ditto on the, I also think that happens to some people on the qual side, right? Like, I have all
Right.
this conversation, all this conversation, all this conversation with one person. How representative is that person? I don't know. And you're sort of stuck in that barrel. So I can totally understand. And so, you went from there to in-house, right? So there's a version, right, where you go off to a more quality agency. Why do you think you ended up at Kimberly-Clark rather than maybe going off to someplace that had a more mixed methods or qual-centric version of market research?
Right. It's a good question. I think at that point, I had been then vendor side, as I said, for several years, and really getting client side experience. First of all, just from experience, like, sort of having that in your background experience really appealed to me. And I wanted to specialize and really get into, kind of going back to the story theme, the story of a brand. Like, there are people stories, and then I really feel like some of the most interesting stories are almost, what's the story of that brand? So the first brand I worked on when I went to Kimberly-Clark was Kleenex. Over 100-year-old brand, has a very interesting story. Like, you can go back to the 1920s and see how they were representing facial tissue and Kleenex at that time, and where it came from, and the evolution over time, and then also the evolution and how people are using it and purchasing it and all of those things. So yes, getting client side was really my goal. It was surprisingly difficult to find what I wanted to get and to have people allow me to do that, given my experience at IRI, which was amazing. I thought my experience at IRI was great. And also the training at IRI, with, like you said, only having the one lever, it trained me on what questions to ask that I needed another lever for, which I think was invaluable experience. Like, I knew what I didn't know coming from the data that I had, which I use all of the time now in my job, where it's like, what's the question? What's the actual question that leads me to the next question that's going to lead me to the answer? I think it started there. But when I was leaving IRI and looking for a client side job, I was really only getting interest from category management positions. There were multiple manufacturers who said, this is great. What you've been doing is great. It's perfect for category management, but I really wanted to get out of that point of sale at the store, very tactical thing and kind of go back to people's households and figure out what they were doing there leading up to the purchase. And it still surprises me that at 5 to 7 years into my career, when I started looking for jobs, I'm like 27 years old and people were telling me I was already boxed into something,
Yeah.
which is sort of insane at that point. Like, I mean, I get it more now, but at that point, and I look back and I think about this when I counsel and mentor other, younger, earlier on in their career, different people who are looking for different things and giving them a shot at different things and not boxing people in, especially that early, but maybe ever into, well, this is what you're doing. So I really only see you, your role has been a great feeder for this thing, but I can't see you going over here. And Kimberly-Clark was one of the only manufacturer side companies that said it doesn't have to be category management, category development. Will allow you to come into this brand level role. Granted, it was analytics at first, but it was a springboard for me to get closer to consumer research. But yes, they were very open to doing that. And, that was one of the pivotal parts where I was very grateful to have found a way in, because a lot of other places said, I would really love to hire you for this role. I just can't. You don't have the direct experience, again, at like 5 to 7 years into my career.
Right. Pull on that thread a little bit. So you're getting a lot of no's from folks. Yes, on a personality fit. Yes, I like you in the interview. I just can't do it because blah, 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 blah. How did you get Kimberly-Clark over that hump? How did you help them see that part of you that could be more than just, sort of category manager doing inventory shaping?
Right. I think that they had a more open mindset in general, just on who they hired and the backgrounds that they were willing to hire. Maybe partially because they're in a smaller town and they kind of have to be a little bit more open to having people come there. And when I started there, it was actually, I'm from Wisconsin, so it was a move back home for me. So all of those things worked out. Obviously, at that time too, there was no hybrid models or remote or anything like that. So 100% in the office. And I think that they've always had, or at least when I was there, they had a mindset of a little more openness and experiences and a little more of what is the skill set of the person. And once I was there, I also saw the fact that there was even a lot of moving around within departments. So there were marketing researchers that then became ABMs. And there were people in R&E who had a completely, chemical engineering background who became market researchers. Like, there was definitely the idea of your background doesn't necessarily box you in. If you're going to be good at this other role, then you're going to be good at this other role.
Did you sort of luck into that, or someone, so what I'm hearing from you is it's not so much something you did, it's that you found the right glove for your baseball, right? You found somebody who could be adaptable to you. Is that something you sort of heard from somebody else, or it's just through blind applying you found some place that had that more flexible mindset?
I was very vocal at the time to a lot of recruiters about what I was looking for.
Hmm.
So that definitely helped. Again, we were probably right on the cusp, like not to LinkedIn yet, though. That didn't really exist as it does today, even at that time. So it was more the recruiter model at that point, and which was actually helpful in some way because I had one-on-one relationships with actual recruiters who knew what I had done, who knew, to the extent that they knew what I was good at and my skill set. And so they could also kind of pave that way with the client and say, I'm bringing you this person. She has this great background, like, love her, think she's perfect for this, and you should interview. So unlike sort of the black box online postings that we're all doing now, there was that it was much more relational at that point where, I could form a relationship with a recruiter. She had a relationship with Kimberly-Clark and their recruiter. She could come back and sort of we'd all talk about. So I definitely think I never thought about it before, but I definitely think that helped. And then was able to kind of, like you said, their openness combined with my talking about how my skills did fit, maybe not the consumer research role, even at Kimberly-Clark at that point coming in, was still too far. But the analyst role, I definitely had the skill set for. So it was just convincing them kind of that switch. And then with an eye to the fact that I always wanted to then move once I was into consumer research.
Yeah, we talk often about the pivot job, right? Pivot rather than jump, right? Move 1 foot, not 2 feet, right? You stayed in
Right.
analytics, you stayed in that very data-oriented role, but you went from out to in, right? And then that next step was like okay, you do, a year and a half at Kleenex, and then you do another year at Cottonelle, and then you get that opportunity to move the other foot and say, okay, I want to go into consumer insights, and I want to move that other
Right.
sort of like, and you've got credibility and friends within the organization, and you can rely on some social network stuff within an organization, not in the
Right.
LinkedIn sense of the word, but just in the like knowing
Right.
people's word
Yes.
to move
And
around.
yeah, and that's definitely the key. Like I think for every role switch that I've had like that, there's always kind of like a Venn diagrammy sort of like gray area where it's like, okay, you're doing this role, but start doing this other role
Mm-hmm.
like as you're doing it so that the blend doesn't seem, to your point, like a jump. It seems like a natural progression. So I was always kind of, I mean, even, jumping back to IRI when I had times to work with a client and it was like an IRI person could come to the focus groups, maybe. I was always that person who's like, I want to go do that. I want it. Like, it was always like, how do I at least get, if I'm not in the role, how do I get these pieces of experience that I can sort of build on and piece together and talk about? And then I've been exposed to those things already. So similarly at Kimberly-Clark, I was in the analyst role, knew I wanted to move to consumer research. So I was always thinking about that all the time of how can I really work closely with my consumer research partner? Can I latch on to some of those projects? Can we do part of the reason why my first promotion happened at Kimberly-Clark is because I was working so closely with my consumer research partner on a brand that we were doing projects together where it did become now we have these two levers of the what and the why, and we're not just two work streams working with our team, our brand team, but we're putting our story together. And so it was always kind of that like, yes, I want to put the story together because I want to have the best story, but I also want to get your experience. And I'm like, let's do that together so I can sort of like um, ride the coattails of the consumer research experience.
Yeah, so that expansive sort of hand up, where can I get it by hook or by crook version of things, you know, the
Yes.
scrappy, the scrappy version of something can make a huge difference. And to your point, not just from a learning perspective, hey, I went and took a course or I tried to go, from a doing perspective, hey, I'm going to try and run a project. I'm going to try and like get involved in people doing this.
Yeah.
You know, you've made your way to behavioral science. Let's position this in time, right? So, you spent 2000, it's 2010. You spent, you're now 2 years into your career at Kimberly-Clark. Behavioral science is now at least starting to become kind of a whisper in the world at large, right? When you started at IRI in 2001, that wasn't a term,
No.
right? And so now it's starting to be maybe a whisper in the world. Do you remember when this started when you started hearing about, hey, this behavioral focus and maybe this more scientific version of what we were doing?
I do. I explicitly remember because I latched onto it right away. We had a prior CMO a few CMOs ago at Kimberly-Clark who kind of to your point, like things were coming on the scene talking about behavioral science. And luckily, because it ended up being very serendipitous for me, he really said, this is something we're going to do here.
Mhm.
And I give, much like I give the business school at Wisconsin a call out, I give Kimberly-Clark a call out everywhere because a company in a small town but yet was very progressive all the time. Another reason I stayed there for a very long time is that I didn't feel there was always growth there. There were always new things. There was always new thinking, very innovative in the marketing research space. And BSI was one of those things. And we had a CMO who said, no, this is going on. I think it's important. Here's why I think it's important. I don't really know how to do it. We're going to have people go and figure out how to do it, how we wrangle this, where we should be doing it, what we should be investing in it. So that was really a pivotal moment. He actually, there was someone else put in the behavioral science sort of initiative capability role first before me. So that happened. It wasn't like a big interview sort of process. She got to have the opportunity to be put in that role. But immediately when she did, it was sort of similar as I was saying about consumer research. I immediately thought, I want to do that too. I want to learn as much as I can about this. If there's a core team of people who are going to be B-side champions, I want to be one. I want to do pilots. I want to learn. And so I started kind of reading books as well, and looking out into the industry on all the regular books that are the ones that you're probably thinking of. I mean, that's kind of where I started. What are the top 3 books that I should go and read? And then when that person who had the role moved on, within about a year and a half, I immediately jumped at the chance to interview. There were several people internally who were interested actually in that behavioral science kind of capability, sat in a center of excellence type of thing. So didn't sit on one particular brand, but was really in charge of, again, wrangling this. What should we do? What should we be piloting? I had our prior VP of marketing research would constantly push on what is the ROI of this, which was a great push. So all of those things kind of led me into that role. But I was immediately drawn to it because it seemed like it was a way to tell better, richer, more true to life stories, and then also a way to kind of provide insight into solving the most complex puzzles. So going back even to those 2 things like that I love and gravitate towards, the storytelling and the puzzles, it was like, this is a thing to do that better. Plus it's really cool and interesting to talk about, to do, to experiment and delve into. So yes, that's kind of how I moved into that.
Yeah, so I hear some promoting pressure around like, hey, just it's new and interesting, and you as a person are interested in new and you have a lot of curiosity, you're interested in new and interesting things, and it's the new interesting thing. But I also hear, to your point, there's a little bit of this like, hey, maybe this can help me solve harder puzzles, right? This is a better tool than maybe the way that we've been doing it, and there's an opportunity here to like, take some of those great unknowns that we've never really been able to solve through, I'm going to call it traditional market research, right? Maybe this is a set of tools that might allow us to get at some of those.
Right.
When you worked
Right.
your way over, what was it like going from, to your point, you'd worked on brands, right? Kleenex, Cottonelle, Huggies, back Kleenex, and then you went over into the COE. How was stepping away from a brand? How did you navigate that? How did that feel?
It's different for sure, because by nature, now I was in this sort of situation of piloting things, but I didn't work directly on the brands anymore. So that was really good, sort of foreshadowing for the role I'm in now, because I was almost doing a lot of internal selling on behavioral science. I mean, to some degree, I had some pilot budget money, but I had to go to I didn't have enough, and I didn't certainly have enough people. I was only one person. I didn't have enough people to work on everything that I wanted to go work on. So building kind of a vision for behavioral science, what we were kind of going back to the ROI piece, what we were going to get out of it, what we always have more that we want to do than we can do. So slating, this is what I really am going to focus on this year and next year and the next year. And then gaining that internal buy-in. So I did that role for a few years, and I was consistently going back and making that connection to the businesses, making that connection to broader KC goals as a whole, knowing that no one was really going to, as you said, like, it's interesting, cool, but no one's going to do anything or invest time and money and people, resources for something that's interesting. So I was having to make the case always of, oh, this is what you're trying to do on, Kotex brand. You're trying to get people to use XYZ every day, or you're trying to get people to use more Huggies wipes, whatever it is. How can I leverage behavioral science to do that? Because A, I want to answer the question. Also, B, I want to further the initiative and the exploration of behavioral science. So it has to count. It has to matter from a business perspective. It has to not just, as you said, I can't only find it interesting. The rest of my team can't only find it interesting. I have to prove that it's pushing the business forward, or there won't be an investment in this a year or 2 years from now.
And so, you're one of the things I note from that is that's a lot of main character energy there, my friend, right? From the hey, I want to watch, I want to, I want to be the person behind the person, I want to sort of, be the analytic
Yeah,
manager or the insights manager, et cetera. And all of a sudden, that's a lot of main character energy. Tell me about
that's
that.
true. That's true. Good point. I think, yes, all of the experiences that I had before that were sort of good foundational to driving me to that point. And it did feel like that was a really pivotal point because it was now you are the only one. You are the only one doing this. And it was very much in cross-functional rooms that I had never been in before
Mhm.
and at global seats of the table that I had never been at before. And at levels of Casey's organization that I had never been at before. At this point, I was now reporting directly into the CMO org. So not in the businesses anymore. And I think that anytime earlier than right at that moment would have been too early.
Mm.
And so it did come around at the exact right time. For me personally, I had just gotten back from maternity leave like a minute before. And I remember thinking in my head, like, this is not great timing, but this is when it's happening. And so this is the shot. Like I can't miss this round and let another person take this role. And plus I had so much passion for it, so many ideas for it. And I was like, okay, not everything happens at perfect timing when you want it to. This is when it's happening. So like we're gonna go do it.
Well, plus, in many ways, and hopefully in retrospect, it is great timing. I mean, new moms make amazing behavioral scientists because, behavioral science at its best really cuts through the cruft, right? We're not going to spend 12
Yeah,
hours ideating on nonsense here. We're like, going to get the evidence, solve the problem, do the thing, run it's a very like,
right.
and,
That is true.
new moms have this great, new parents have this, I'm not spending one more minute on this thing than I have to. And so we're going to go get the right answer and we're going to get the evidence that gets us the right answer. And then we're going to move the fuck on.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. And B-side definitely was one of those things that it gave me the language and the tools to say things to the business like we're talking, to your point, we're talking in very abstract terms. Like this is what we want to do or we want to grow share and I think I did definitely have that directness of what behavior are you trying to change? Like we can't do anything here until you and I articulate together that this is the behavior that your particular consumer is doing right now. This is what you want them to do. And then we'll construct this bridge to get there. But if you can't tell me what you want them to do and what they're doing now, then we can't start until we do that. And so, yes, I think all of those things definitely, it was a good point in time. And I felt like I had kind of come up through the ranks in a very methodical way, enough where I had that credibility to kind of say, I have all of these foundational pieces that I've made now. Let's go build that bridge. And I now kind of can help you know how to do that. And BSI was definitely a big help in that.
Well, and credibility is, to your point, a big part of it because in order to be effective at being a behavioral scientist, you have to be able to call bullshit, right? You have to be able to say, hey, I am not going to start this project until we agree on a behavior here, right? You can't keep saying, I want people to love Huggies. I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what
Right.
that means, right? And there's a lot of talking truth to power and just saying, like, I will hold this thing until you make a decision about what love means. Uh, and in very tangible, observable, behavioral ways.
Yes. Um, exactly. I think, and there was a lot of, I would say, at as the industry was coming along, there was a lot of the thinking that was happening, and there was also concurrently a lot of the tool progression, which was really exciting and really interesting, and also really daunting and a little bit scary, to be honest, because that part is less intuitive and less um, validated. Like I was going around to all of these different vendors and they were all saying, we do system one, we do system one, we do, this is how we're doing this. Like we're not going to have people do PI on concepts anymore. We're going to have them talk about the concept and we're going to analyze their tone and pitch. And that's how we're going to tell you that you have a winning concept. And I would be like, that sounds really cool. How do I know that that's better than PI? They're like, well, we don't totally know that yet. Like we haven't completely validated.
Unclear.
Um, So there was a lot of sort of that, a little bit Wild West of like the eye tracking and the facial coding and the EEG and the biometrics, and which was again really exciting and fun. But my accountability to my global huge manufacturer organization was, if you're going to spend the money, if you're going to invest in these things, we're going to give you people to work on it, money to work on it. You better be sure that you're actually getting a better answer. And in worst case scenario, you're not getting a wrong answer than what we would have done before. So that was really, I think, also a key part of that experience, and being on client side that you maybe don't have in the same way if you're not on client side.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you said something really key in there, where academia is comparing against perfect, right? Academia is saying P less than point zeros, in an ideal world, it's P zero, right? Like I am 100% sure I know exactly, I am omniscient and I know exactly what it is. You said something really important in there, which is, in private industry, a lot of it is about better than what we did before, right? I'm happy to invest in this. I'm happy to spend the time and the money, but you have to be able to prove not that it's perfect, but rather that it's better than the alternative versions or the thing that we already know how to do.
Right.
Um, so you run this behavioral science capability, for almost 3.5 years, and then you step back into the brand. Talk to me about like going back into the brand and what that was like, and how that sort of felt.
Yes, I did, because of global reorgs
Right.
like that were going on at the time. And a lot of sort of instability is too strong, but I guess like
Hmm.
things changing a little bit in central orgs, in marketing research, also just in the marketing structures at Casey. So things were happening. Things were kind of what was coming on the scene was a lot of the predictive analytics, a lot of the first party data, a lot of the sort of spotlight. We had new CMOs, we had new leadership, we had things changing. A lot of the spotlight and the investment on behavioral science was changing, and almost like the spotlight was shifting over here.
Hmm.
And it was a lot of what the new thing was. So I did go back on the business briefly, and then as you can see in the years, COVID happened and the
All the things. But
all the things.
but talk to me about that, because I really wanted to, you had this experience where, like any good scientist, right? You had like A and then an intervention, right? You were like on a brand, then you had an intervention, right? That was the years in behavioral science, and then you went back to a brand. Did you approach you're doing, I understand that you moved from, manager to senior manager and those sorts of things, but did
Yeah.
you approach the work really differently post those years in behavioral science?
Yes. And I mean, I loved my behavioral science role. So I was like, when I moved back to the business is when I started thinking I would like to leave Casey and really focus on that behavioral science piece again. But again, then COVID happened, so that pushed off a little bit. But when I went back in the business, I definitely did. And people definitely sought that out. Even though it wasn't a dedicated role anymore, it was the brands that I was on were very much like, oh, this is so awesome because we're going to be able to do the behavioral science, like you're bringing this behavioral science lens to this business.
Mm.
And so that was an important piece of sort of furthering the sector that I came back to on that time.
Got it. So now you have this reputation a little bit as, yeah, she's going to come back to
Inside.
be our senior manager of consumer insights, but she's going to do the behavioral science thing as part of that,
Yes.
right? We're going to get it inside of our business.
For sure. Yeah. It was part of that. Like we're bringing it back, and it was adult care and feminine care. So great businesses to bring it back onto. I mean, there's a lot of things in there within the world of, the world of the categories that Casey lives in, like adult incontinence and the things that most people don't really talk about or think about, but are
Yeah.
very much part of that business.
Well, and to your point, as fun as it is to work on Kleenex, Kleenex is like a branded noun, right? Like we refer to all Kleenex as Kleenex, even when
Right.
it's not Kleenex, right? You're fighting from a position of strength. Whereas, when you look at You by Kotex, Poise, Depends, those sorts of things, adult incontinence wear and those sorts of things don't have the same, you're not fighting from the same position of strength, and you're fighting a very different thing, right?
Right.
Kleenex, you're fighting, it's not use versus non-use, it's your thing versus somebody else's thing. They're going to use what do you call facial tissue, I guess?
Facial tissue.
They're going to use a facial tissue that is Kleenex or not Kleenex, right?
Oh, what one would hope, but not always.
True. Yes, for sure. But like your primary use, you're not fighting against
Right.
non-use, right? Whereas with adult, incontinence,
Mhm.
not use is a very serious part of the issue, right? It's like getting people to be willing to wear forget what brand, anything, right, is a very different
Right.
piece. What is it like to work on a behavior where your primary competitor is just not using to anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And there are, to your point, there's several of the categories at Kimberly-Clark that are like that. I mean, there's several categories just in the world that are like that, where it's the relevancy of the category is the first piece versus a lot of other things. Like you mentioned, Cottonelle. I mean, bath tissue is definitely one of those 99% household penetration. They're going to use it. So it's a share game, and that's what it is. But I really love the questions where it's like, hey, I could take or leave this category in general. Like, I don't even have a substitute. I just might not buy into it at all. Those are the greatest behavioral questions, I think, because it's like, how do you get someone to even use an entire category that they don't think of, or that they want to just completely disregard, or it's losing penetration, or a lot of times, and a lot of questions we get from our clients now are, this category was really strong. We don't get why the younger people aren't using it. It's always those younger people. It was the millennials. Now it's Gen Zs that are screwing everything up. It's like pretty soon it'll be Gen Alpha. They're not doing whatever it is that, the older generations used to do, and trying to figure out how to either make it more relevant for whatever this younger, sometimes multicultural audience is, or just reinvent the category. Like, those are your two options. So,
But you
um,
decide at some point, I mean, you've got this new challenge, you're moving from share to usage, right? Everybody uses it, but it's going to be my thing versus somebody else's, versus not everybody uses it. I need to get them to use it in the first place, whether it's mine or somebody else's. But you're always, it sounds like in the back of your mind, you have a sense, man, I really missed that behavioral science role.
I did. Yes, I missed the dedicated focus on the very sort of like, first of all, intellectual exercise of capability building and
Mm.
delving into new ways to apply things to questions, different questions. I also loved the part of my role that was working on many brands, even though they were all Kimberly-Clark brands at that point, but being able to like spread across many questions, see parallels across brands where they were trying to do similar things. Again, sort of that, maybe that like pattern recognition sort of thing that I like to do when I was younger, like look at the ways in which like these seemingly two very different categories are both struggling with the same category relevancy problem, or whatever the case may be, or they're both struggling with trying to form a daily habit. And there were many of Casey categories that were trying to form a daily habit. So I used to do like habit-based workshops for different brands and things like that. So I missed, yes, the behavioral science really dedication to thinking about that, and not having to do all of the day-to-day stuff that comes on a brand, which I loved earlier on, but was just kind of getting a little bit away from that. And I also loved the idea of sort of looking across many questions on different categories at one time and seeing those parallels. And I missed that for my role as well. So all of that kind of culminated into why I moved on.
Yeah, that makes a total sense. And then you went, and the move is an interesting one, right? Because you go to Ipsos, very storied place. Behavioral science predated you. There was folks who were working on this for a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
really interesting, a place where they're very PhD heavy, they're very academic heavy, they're very like prideful about that. And then you go in, tons of industry experience, but you're not a PhD social psychologist or a PhD whatever. Talk to me about coming to Ipsos, convincing them that you were the right person, like working with colleagues who maybe have biases about what the right person looks like. Tell me a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
coming to Ipsos.
Yes to all of those things, and I'm glad to see some of the reputation precedes us that out
Well,
there in the industry.
behavioral science is not a small field, right? We all know each other. It's hard to keep a secret here.
Yes, yeah, I love that about it. So yes, I had the benefit essentially of my now manager who leads our team was I was his client when I was at Kimberly-Clark in the BSI role. So we had done a big pilot project together on, speaking of habits, it was a habits-based project together. And so when I was leaving KC, he was on my short list of people that I reached out to, who were in behavioral science specifically, given that's what I wanted to do. And again, this is much like when I left IRI to go to KC, it wasn't it wasn't easy from a couple of avenues to try and find my next thing. I thought that it would be interesting to go back vendor side, and a few of the vendor side places that I talked to said, you just have been client side for so long.
Yeah.
We can't, like, you were vendor side, but it was at a more junior level. We're not sure about bringing you on at a more senior level vendor side. So again, kind of goes back to that, like, that boxing in of people, and that sort of like, well, if you don't have this that looks exactly like this, it's a non-starter. That I get a little bit why it happens, but it's also unfortunate because I think that's how people don't get sort of the opportunities that would have been great opportunities for them. And I thought I did have a lot of those pieces with everything that I mentioned before. I had to sell a B-site internally. I did have to do that. I had to go to my business partners and make the case of why they should be giving me their investment and money and people. And so I did feel like it was very, very similar. But I didn't have, and then so that's kind of from vendor side. I didn't have, as you mentioned, the PhD in cognitive psychology. I didn't come up in the world of behavioral science in a similar way as a lot of the very academic, like I had my experience at Kimberly-Clark, which I thought was a great one, especially at the practical side of the applied. There I got to figure out how to apply it even across from not just marketing. Like I was trying to figure out how to apply it to product development and to design. And there were even things where we were applying behavioral science to the experience of people in our mills who are working on more of the actual production side or HR, all of those things. So I didn't know why that didn't count, sort of coming into the world of behavioral science. But very lucky that Jesse, who leads our team, I talked to him, and it was more just almost, I was looking for advice of how do I do this? What does the world of B-Sci look like out there right now? What would I do if I were going to make the jump? What would someone like me, since he knew me and had worked with me? And he was kind of like, what about we have a role in our team? So that's really the way that it happened, and was amazing and felt like a great fit right away. I'm not, as you said, didn't come up through the typical way, but I think much like the B-Sci role when I was at KC, the right thing happened at the exact right time here as well. And if it was earlier, it probably wouldn't have worked. If it was later, it probably wouldn't have worked. It worked right at that time, given where I was and what I had done and what I wanted to do and where the team was and all of those kind of things. So was very grateful that the stars aligned there.
Yeah, I mean, timing is, you realize so later in your life how much of your career is just timing, right? There are all
Yeah.
these forks and alternative universes where you get this job or get this opportunity or take this job versus turn it down, and where that sort of pivoted you. I can think of all sorts of jobs that I, have taken or not taken along the way where I'm like, wow, it would be really different. Not better, not worse, just really different had I not chosen to opt in or out of that particular opportunity at that particular moment.
Yeah.
And to your point, right, Ipsos has a very particular version of what behavioral science, the path to behavioral science looks like. It is very PhD and academic. I think there are other places that would have valued your experience at KC. The folks at Walmart, et cetera, they have a great, you know, on and off relationship with behavioral science. But when it's on, I mean, they love folks who come from places like yours. So there are places where that more applied stuff, to your point, having done that, having worked across a number of things, having applied it to the people in the mills, et cetera, is a really attractive version. But you're bringing that to Ipsos, and that's a good thing too, right? It helps them broaden their sort of capability set and understanding to have somebody with your level of applied depth uh, inside of the team. What do you think you'll ever go back brand side, or you think like hey, being on the vendor side really is where fits for you?
Um, Possibly. I like to sort of never say never and just look at the next thing and the next. I had really, as part of that sort of like leaving Casey, I had one of the other another prior vendor partner that I talked to where I was sort of doing explores, and she said something that I think about all the time. And again, this was during COVID, all these times, but she said, just you're thinking too far in the future, because I was very anxious at that time about moving. And, to your point, what about this decision? It's going to lead me down this other path. And it was so overwhelming. And she said, only think about the next 2 years, because if this whole COVID thing has taught us anything, it's that looking beyond that is like, you just don't know anyway. Everything is changing all the time, and you never know, like personally and professionally and blah, blah, blah. You're thinking too far ahead. Think of the next 2 years. And that really helped me and kind of grounded and centered me. And I did. When I came to Ipsos, I was like, I'm thinking of the next 2 years. Um, Now it's been double that, more than double that. So I think that that's what I always, and when I was at KC for so long, what I was always thinking is, am I learning more? Am I growing more? Am I developing more? And I kind of would do that check in with myself every year or two, and then I would say, yes, I am. I still am. I'm getting this opportunity, that opportunity, new brands, then the B-side role, then all of those things, and that kept me there until it didn't, kind of thing. But I think that now, like I check in with myself every so often and go, am I still learning things? Am I still developing? Am I still growing? Am I still adding value? All of those things. And the answer has still definitely been yes. So I love working vendor side on all different, not only brands now, but now all of the different industries outside of, my, obviously, I've been very consumer packaged goods focused up until now, which is great to have kind of that depth, but to be able to work on finance and tech and the auto industry, retail, and, all of the different things, even a little bit dabbling in healthcare and things like that, has just been really interesting, especially from a behavioral science perspective, thinking about more than just consumer packaged goods in, traditional retail stores, but how do you think about patients, or in the nonprofit sector, how do you think about donors? How do you think about users of different online platforms? The challenges are just, at the end of the day, it's all people. You're still thinking about behaviors, but the contexts of all of those things and the business questions and what they're trying to do is different and nuanced and fresh. And so, yeah, for now, I really love it. And I think the marrying of a lot of my team, I have 3 directors who report to me right now, and they all come from that academic side. But I think the marrying of the depth of the academic knowledge that they have with the applied side that I have is a really great kind of marriage as well. And kind of gives us that opportunity to go deep, also apply, speak to clients in their language, which is really important, figuring out what they're going to do with things. And also just, I've been really lucky with my team. It's the best team that I've ever worked with. They're super smart. They're also just, I always say I would have dinner one-on-one with any of them, like tomorrow, and I would be happy to. And they're just funny and witty and interesting, and just can't say enough good things about my team. So that always helps. Like, it definitely is once you get to that side. And I feel a little bit like I found my tribe of people who overthink things as much as I do and always have. Like, I've always gotten this feeling that the depth to which I sort of analyze life and people, and even going back to, as I said, the quiet observer in the corner who watch people's facial expressions. And I don't get the feeling like most people I meet look at life and people and questions and think about why people do what they do, or what they're going to do, or how to, hack behavior. Like, I've never met people who think about the world like that. And my current team does. I mean, I could have an in-depth conversation also with, not just go to dinner, but have a very interesting conversation for 2 hours where we just overthink things.
Behavioral science, the society of overthinkers.
Yes.
It's very true. The first really big behavioral science team that I built at Clover Health came from all over the organization. It was a broad group of people. And the first time we had a team meeting, I kind of said, look, ask me anything. I'm a very transparent leader. Like, tell me a little bit about, ask me whatever you want to know. And one of the people, behavioral scientists are very direct. So hands up immediately. And she said, why us? And so I had them take the need for cognition scale, which if you've never taken it is a brilliant and lovely scale. But it contains items like I would like everything in my life to be a puzzle. And so they all took it and then they went, oh, well, that's why
This makes sense.
yeah, this is behavioral science. We are the people who are like, ah, yes, we really like thinking and we're really curious about the world and everything is a puzzle and that's great. And if I had to if I had to do an escape room to get out of my bedroom every morning, I would think that was awesome, not terrible. But I like the Society of Overthinkers. If we ever start, behavioral science does not need more organizations. We have too many organizations as it is. But if we ever start another one, we should call it the Society of Overthinkers.
Yes, I agree. Endearingly, in a good way.
Yeah, endearing, not bad, not anxiety like overthinking, just joyful overthinking.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming and being joyful on the show and peeling back a little bit of that layer of your own joyful overthinking about your career and your life and how you've gone into these things. And I think you're such a great example of how people don't have to follow a singular format. And I love that you've ended up at Ipsos where you are very atypical for their kind of pathway. And I think that's a lovely thing to show that they as an organization can broaden to you and you can broaden to them, and that's a lovely marriage.
Yes, awesome. Well, no, I loved this, and I love that you're sort of like, as you said, shining a spotlight on the atypical ways to get there, illuminating pathways, unboxing boxes,
So that
all of those
somewhere
types of things.
7-year-old Kathryn now can feel like this is a pathway that
Yeah,
can continue on, right? She doesn't
yes,
end up in the marketing department. She ends up, we have a variety of ages here. And I remember interviewing Pete Judo, and Pete was like, yeah, my undergraduate degree is in behavioral science. And I was like, right? Like, can you imagine existing in a world and living in a world where that had been an actual option as opposed to the hacky ways that marketing or social psychology or whatever the ways that people get to this, that is just mind-boggling to me. You and I exist at such a wonderful time.
I agree. Well, and now the future is, who knows, majoring in AI. I don't know.
We shall see. Thanks
Whatever
so much
that
for
looks
coming on
like.
the show, Kathryn.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.